Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us on our weekly AJN Zoom event, and welcome to any new people that we may have this week. We also have people watching on Facebook and some who listen to the audio replay, which is broadcast every Thursday at midday and Sundays at 4 p.m. on J-Air Community Radio. That's at FM 88 in Melbourne or j-air.com.au everywhere else. Welcome to you all. My name is Alan Friedman, and on your screen you can also see David Adler, President of the AJA, Robert Gregory, our Director of Public Affairs, and our guest tonight, Ross Kriel, who is President of the Jewish Council of the Emirates. And of course, the subject tonight is Jewish life in the United Arab Emirates. The format will be as usual. Ross and I will have a chat and for about half an hour, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. If you do want to ask a question, what we ask you to do is raise your hand electronically. The way to do that is in the reactions icon along the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you click that, you'll soon see how to raise your hand. You can put written questions on the chat function, and Robert will read out some of those during question time. Now, just before we start, we have a very nice brief message to read out or to look at. So I'll hand over to David for just a moment.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Now, I want to show you a photo and then a special message. The photo that should be on your screen now is a meeting in Canberra at the official residence of the United Arab Emirates Ambassador. That's him second from the left, together with a senior policy person, and the three people on the other side is the delegation of the AJA who met with him in his residence, and we received like royalty. It was quite remarkable. So he has exchanged messages with me in the last 48 hours, and I want to show you a little of it so you get a feel for the tone of the relationship that's developed. So here's the first message from Ambassador Abdullah Al-Sabusi. I asked him whether he wanted to log in briefly this evening, and unfortunately he has, it's a parliamentary sitting week, so he's got commitments with politicians this evening, but he says, thank you, dear David, for the invitation. I will be sure to catch a recording of it if it becomes available. It's a sitting week here in Canberra, and I have guests to entertain until late that evening. This is yesterday. I look forward to seeing real soon, my friend. Sincerely, Abdullah. So below we have an extract of a couple of more communications. So I say to him, hopefully we can arrange Shabbat events in Melbourne and Sydney with you as guest of honour. And he responds further, please do. We do have a really positive relationship that we want to expand. I'm always up for joining celebrations, not as guest of honour, but as a friend of AJA and the community at large. Sincerely, Abdullah. Now, the reason for showing you that is obviously it's highly relevant to this evening's topic, but also it gives you an insight into some of the behind-the-scenes work that AJA does on behalf of the Jewish community in Israel. So back to you, Alan, and on with the event, please.
Okay, thanks, David. Now, a couple of months ago, my wife Goldie and I flew Emirates for our trip to Israel and Italy, and specifically because of the Abraham Accords, we decided to spend a few days in Dubai on the way home. I wasn't sure what to expect, but it was a real eye-opener and a wonderful experience. Dubai is modern, clean, safe, friendly, and a shopping haven. And the question for us really was, what is life like there for Jews now? You'll get to hear about my impressions as we speak, but to take us on a tour of Jewish life in the United Arab Emirates, we're delighted to have Ross Kriel, the President of the Jewish Council of the Emirates, join us today. Now, during our stay, Goldie and I spent a Shabbat in Dubai where Ross and his assistant Dror Maoz from the Minyan on the Palm, that's the shul, were wonderful hosts, but we'll get to that a little later in the evening. Ross, it's good to see you again, and thanks for joining us on our AJA Zoom event.
It's a great pleasure and honor to be here, Alan, and lovely to see you and Goldie.
Thank you. Okay, Ross, let's begin by going back a few years, because you actually immigrated to Dubai from South Africa well before the Abraham Accords. Can you tell us a little of the story of how that happened?
Sure. I went to Dubai for work reasons. I'm from Johannesburg originally. I work for a French multinational, and with a head office in Dubai covering Middle East and Africa. And so I was reporting to an office in Dubai and had to go there for the first time in 2008. I went around this time of year, middle of the summer. I arrived in Dubai on Emirates, an observant Jew. And I looked out the window and it was a little bit dusty. There was a bit of a sandstorm and it looked a bit reddish. And I just thought, I'm on another planet. You know, this is not Earth. This is some other part of the solar system. It was so far away from anything that felt familiar or comfortable. And I really felt like an alien, you know, and just thought, how's this going to work? But interestingly, as soon as I arrived, much like I think you and Goldie felt 13 years later, I felt fine. I felt comfortable. I felt at ease. I wasn't identifying at that time as Jewish outwardly. Now, of course, we do that. But the place felt plural, Western, high-tech, exciting. And we just instinctively felt, even back then, that this was really a very, very interesting place, which might have an interesting future for it. And fast forward 5 years, my boss in Dubai said to me, Ross, we want you to move to Dubai. And I just said to him, look, I'm an observant Jew. How can I do that? You know, it's just not possible. He said, look, what I want you to do is bring your wife out. Let her decide. You know, it was very, very smart, a smart move on his side. And so I came out with Eddie, and we made contact with some of the members of the community that were living there. It wasn't yet functioning as a community, but Jews had found each other and were starting to commune informally. We went to the supermarkets and looked for kosher. I sort of researched Dubai and wanted to see if there was evidence of anti-Semitism, obvious hatred of Israel, anything, you know, any obvious red flags. And it really all came up positive. We found kosher food. The Jewish community members that we reached out to said that really they were having a fabulous life there and hadn't experienced any kind of anti-Semitism or problems. And they'd made Jewish friends. And even though there wasn't a formal community, they were sort of enjoying being there. And Ellie and I decided to sort of take a leap of faith. And 2013, we moved with our 2 young children to Dubai. And that was the first 6 months was quite demanding. You know, we're an observant Jewish family, so we had to make arrangements for the children to go to, you know, to have Jewish education virtually. And my children, by the way, were doing that years before COVID. And we had to organize our house. We had to put mezuzahs on the doors, and we had to create an observant Jewish home in the middle of the middle of the Arabian Peninsula. And back in those days, having a mezuzah on the door was a very unusual thing. And people said to me, you know, you must be mad to do this. But even back then, we had a strong sense that the culture of the place made that possible, that it was possible to be Jewish, possible to flourish there as a Jew, possible to build Jewish community life, and ultimately possible for there to be friendship with Israel. And all those instincts proved to be the case. And we were very, very powerfully vindicated in our sense that this could be a very, very interesting place for a Jewish community. I'll stop there, Alan, because I don't want this to be a monologue.
No, that's okay. Okay, so let's just talk a little about the United Arab Emirates. Can you just give us a very brief overview of the population, the politics, the history of the place? How many Emirates are there? How are they? How do they function? How does the place operate?
Yeah, so it's a history in a sense for us as Australian South Africans is somewhat close to home, because before 1971, there was no UAE. They were basically they were called trucial states. There was a maritime treaty with England, which ensured that the British would have access to the Arabian Gulf without fear of piracy or some of the other issues they encountered in the late 19th century. And they provided sort of external protection for these tribal kingdoms. And the various tribal kingdoms, which includes the 7 Emirates, but also Bahrain and Qatar and Kuwait, all had domestic control. Then post-war 1966, Harold Wilson announced that Britain would no longer continue to play that role. And it precipitated a crisis where those various tribal groups had to decide what to do. And Sheikh Zayed, who's the founder of the UAE and the leader of Abu Dhabi, entered into a round of negotiations with all those 10 Emirates, which included Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, but also Dubai, Fujairah, and all the other Emirates that now make up the UAE. And by 1971, 7 of those had decided to come together and form a state. Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar fell out, and the remaining 7 came together under the leadership of Sheikh Zayed and formed the United Arab Emirates. It's a federal structure coming together in an executive committee, which brings together the leaders of those 7 Emirates. And basically, I'd say it's like a constitutional monarchy with a strong executive leadership, but it's federal in structure. It has a parliament. There's quite significant autonomy for the various Emirates, and something you and Goldie would have experienced, Alan, is that the different Emirates are very different from they are different from each other. When you go from Dubai to Abu Dhabi, they're distinct. They're very distinctive. And interestingly, the Jewish communities are different as well, and I can elaborate that.
Yes, please.
But what's happened, though, very interestingly, is that the UAE originally fell into step with other Arabic countries and sort of accepted if you can call them the Khartoum principles, which was not to recognize Israel, not to negotiate and be at peace with Israel. And over time, and particularly in the last 20 years, they developed their own sovereign identity. And it became apparent, 2 things became apparent. First of all, that they wanted to develop a plural nation based on an understanding, an authentic understanding of the Quran. And second of all, that they wanted to be effectively a Switzerland in the Arabian Peninsula, open to everybody. And ultimately, in 2020, that embraced Israel as well with the Abraham Accords. And what's very exciting about the UAE is that they are exercising leadership within the Muslim world, a leadership towards a future where there's a moderate understanding of the Quran, which includes the notion of citizenship and inclusion, first of all. Second of all, a strong push against extremism, and especially violent extremism within the Muslim world. And third of all, a notion that the Muslim world can be great. I hosted Shmoni Batayach recently in Dubai. He's an old friend of mine. I studied at Oxford. And we were driving from the expo site, which Shmoni visited many times, back into the city. And as you drive back into the city, you see the skyline of Dubai. And it's really impressive. It includes the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa. It includes a downtown area with several very, very impressive, amazingly designed buildings. And he just said to me, Ross, I want to see the real Arabia. And what he meant by that was a sort of a souk, with, people selling, oil lanterns and, spices and incense. And I said to Shmuley, what you're looking at now, these skyscrapers, that's the future of Arabia, at least according to the UAE. It's not a place that is full of extremists and somewhat primitive and somewhat old-fashioned. It's an exciting, cutting-edge place with skyscrapers and expats and innovation. And that's what Dubai and the UAE are leading in the Muslim world. And they are playing a role that I think is of vital strategic importance.
And what's the population of the UAE, Ross? And how does, and there are a lot of other nationalities there too, we found out.
Correct, Alan. So the total population is just over 10 million. And only about 1 million of those are Emirati nationals. So I always say to Israelis that there's far fewer Emiratis than Jews in the world, and that always impresses them. But only 10 or 11% of the population of the UAE are local Emirati citizens. And the rest are expats from all over the world. The biggest demographic in the UAE is South Asian, and mostly Indian, but also, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, etc., making up about 60% of the population. And then everybody else is there. There's a strong contingent of Western expats, including Australians, South Africans, Brits, etc., many Europeans, and now increasingly and very interestingly, Israelis. So now you've got this, you've had 1 million Israeli visitors since the end of 2020, and some of those are coming to stay and live in the UAE. And as you drive down Sheikh Zayed, you see Aviv Hospital. As you go into the Mall of the Emirates, you see Jews wearing kipputs and speaking Hebrew. And that's a very, very exciting development. So we are also becoming part of that demographic.
Yeah, and this Sheikh Zayed, is he still around?
No, so Sheikh Zayed, if I'm not mistaken, died in 2002 or thereabouts as the founder of the nation. He was succeeded by Sheikh Khalifa, his oldest son, who passed away last year. And now Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed is the president, also one of the sons of Sheikh Zayed. In Dubai, the leader is Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid. His father, Sheikh Rashid, was also just really an inspirational and charismatic leader. And I want to say that in understanding the UAE, because all of us ask this question, what makes the UAE unusual? Why is this happening there? What's driving their value system? A lot of it is down to leadership, just extraordinary leaders who really had a profound vision of what they wanted the UAE to be. And bear in mind that back in the 1970s, the UAE was really poor. The discovery of oil was still very new. It originally had an economy based on pearls. And, that obviously, that market collapsed. People, were literally poverty stricken. And it was Sheikh Zayed that placed an emphasis on education, almost in a very Jewish way, and encouraged Emiratis to study overseas, encouraged Emirati parents to put their children into school. And what you encounter now among those million or so Emiratis are people that are sophisticated, well-educated, speak impeccable English, are well-versed in sort of Western, political values and social values, and are really exciting to deal with.
So you really had to build a Jewish community from the ground up, basically. Tell us a little bit about the Jewish Council of the Emirates and how did all that start for you?
Sure. So I started living there in 2013. At that point, there were Jews that had found each other, and done a bit more than that. When I arrived in 2013, I arrived just before Rosh Hashanah. There was a Rosh Hashanah event followed by Yom Kippur. A Torah came in, and after the Chagim, it went out again. But there were Jews that had found each other, and I'll never forget that Rosh Hashanah in 2013, because it was really exciting, and we had a sense of frisson and possibility, but there wasn't really a community in existence. And I was praying at home, sort of around the living room table, and a dear friend of mine, Alex Petterfron from Belgium, said to me, phoned me one day, and he said, "Ross, you praying at home on Shabbat, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I also am. Why don't I just come to you and we'll pray together?" And that's how the Minyan started, literally with 2 people. And Alex and I made a decision, and I think it was a very smart one at the time, that we were going to pretend we were 1,000 people, and we were going to, just like the AJA, we were going to run on time. So the Minyan was going to start at 9 on the dot, and we were going to do the whole thing. We were going to do Psukkah Zimra and a full Shachrit and the Haftarah, and we're going to do the Torah reading from a Chumash, and we were going to pretend there were 1,000 of us. And that was good, because we put the message out to the group, 9 a.m., come to Ross's house in Imsakim, and we're doing Jewish services. And 2 weeks later, a third person, Sam, arrived, and a week after that, Ronnie arrived, and before we know it, 6 months later, we had a Minyan, sort of a Minyan of 10 men. And then a lovely woman from Switzerland, Tina Avoya, started bringing sort of drinks, and before we knew it, we had a kiddush. And fast forward 1 or 2 years, Rosh Hashanah 2015, we have 70 people in the house.
Wow.
And at that point, my wife blew the whistle, and she said, this can't carry on. I don't have any privacy. I can't walk down to the living room in my dressing gown on a Saturday morning, and you guys have to find a proper place. So there was a resident in the community who lived 5 minutes walk from me, who had a beautiful villa, and his wife and children had actually gone back to England. And he said to me, "Look, you can, why don't we share the rental in the villa, and you can run services on a Shabbat here and Chagim and what have you, and I'll sort of be upstairs." And I said, fine. And that became the community villa. And for those of us that went to that villa, it was really an amazing place. Jews from all around the world. There was a mosque next door. We were sort of under the radar, and it was very exciting to be there. We really knew that we were on the cusp of something exciting. And I want to actually do a shout out to my dear friend Mari Malza and Monty Sacher, who are members of AJA, are on the call.
Yes.
And they, in fact, connection to you, Alan.
Yes.
And they experienced those early villa days. And what I do want to say is that the community is moving forward very, very quickly in a very exciting way. And it's going through multiple stages of growth. But every stage of the community's life has been beautiful, so now, of course, it's I would say one of the safest Jewish communities in the world. You'll come to Dubai, as you saw yourself, and you can wear a kippah and you can have your tzitzit out, and we really feel that we can be outwardly Jewish. Back in those days, it wasn't the case. We still felt sort of that for reasons of tzniut, or just to take it a step at a time, that we still had to be inwardly Jewish and not outwardly so. But the villa days were really, really exciting. And one of the main reasons they were exciting is that all the Jews were there. It was the one desert island with only one shul. And one guy would walk in sort of with Bermudas and sandals, and another guy would walk in with a kapota and a sort of a black hat and a long beard. And we were all together as Jews, and nobody was asking about politics or affiliations or denominations. There was a real sense of unity. And of course, we had to mature beyond that, and I'm excited that we have. But those early villa days were really exciting. I do want to mention that we made the second decision that we made early on, and it was something that I led, was that we were not going to lead a secret Jewish life like Marano's. You know, we didn't want to be like that at all. And so as soon as I could, I reached out to senior Emirati politicians, and I actually did it through the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Rabbi May, who was the executive director at the time, was actually well connected already in the UAE, and that's an interesting story. But he said, Ross, if you need anything, call me. And I phoned him and I said, Rabbi May, we need to pray. You know, we need to build a community, and we need a Torah. We need to bring in Torahs, and we need permission. So he said, leave it with me. And he came back a week later and he said, Ross, I've spoken to somebody very senior in the UAE, and I've got a letter from them. You're never going to see the letter, but I'm a rabbi and you can trust me. And this is what the letter says. It says you can pray. Pray in a villa. Don't have outward signs that it's a synagogue, but inwardly you can have Torah, you can have books, you can have everything you want. We're going to make arrangements for the Torah to come in. And I've got permission for you. And from that moment onwards, I built relationships with senior Emirati leaders at federal level and in Dubai and Abu Dhabi as well, because we wanted, you know, we didn't want to be under the radar forever, first of all, and we didn't want to break the law, and we wanted to build ourselves. So I would say one of the principal goals that I had in those early years was to build an ecosystem for Jewish life. And I'm very proud to say that if you fast forward 10 years, what do you see in the UAE? 5 kosher restaurants, 3 kosher caterers, a mikveh, 2 well-established synagogues, literally 1 million Israeli visitors and hundreds of thousands of Jewish visitors from the rest of the world, Israeli and Jewish companies establishing themselves, and a real sense that it's normal for Jews to be there. And I think for all of us, and I can mention so many names, but all of us that were pioneers in building that, we're very proud to have been instrumental in creating Jewish life and creating the preconditions for peace with Israel.
Yes, I must say that that before we arrived in Dubai, we planned to spend about 5 days there, and I said to Goldie just before we got there, I said, look, I don't know. I think maybe we've overdone it a bit in Dubai. I don't know what it's going to be like. I sort of envisaged walking around feeling quite uncomfortable being in an Arabic country. But it's as you say, it was quite the opposite. I felt completely comfortable, welcomed. Everybody was so friendly. But I wanted to ask you, are they friendly because there's a very strict rule within the UAE, or are they friendly because they genuinely feel as if they're welcoming their cousins?
It's a bit of both. I mean, the interesting thing about the UAE is that there's a social contract, and everybody coming to the UAE is aware of that contract. And the essence of it is come here, flourish, and let other people flourish as well. Don't disturb your neighbor. Have mutual respect, especially for people that are different from you and have different belief systems. And so that's a social contract, and we really get that. I mean, the way that I put it is, when you arrive in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and you sort of go through customs, you leave your bigotry at the border. There's just no space for it. There actually are formal laws against hatred towards people of a different religion or belief system, and everybody immediately understands that. So that's the law. In terms of the people themselves, the Emiratis are Bedouin by nature. The Bedouins were always the sort of people in the Arabic world that were looked down upon, interestingly. They were always considered to be a little bit sort of primitive and kind of old-fashioned. And I guess what came with that really positively was a sense of ease with people that were different from them, a sense of understanding of what it means to be alienated, a sense of hospitality, and the importance of friendship. And anybody that meets Emiratis and goes into their majlis, or sort of, has a conversation, or, you have a cup of tea, you just instinctively feel that, there's genuine friendship in their nature and in their value system.
And you mentioned when we were there that you have your shul in a hotel for a reason. Just tell us that story.
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say, you mentioned Minyan on the Palm at the beginning. Minyan on the Palm is the successor to the villa community that I described a bit earlier. And it's in a 5-star hotel. You experienced it. The signs to the Minyan are in the lobby for everybody to see. You've got Jews kind of, walking into the lobby, either because they're staying at the, there's a nice picture. They're staying at the Minyan, they're staying at the hotel or close to it.
I'll just interrupt you, Ross. I'll just interrupt you, Ross, because this photo was taken at the time that Goldie and I were there. That's me. Yeah. That's me. And there's Goldie with her back to the camera, and we were listening to that lady. I remember listening to her talk. It was very interesting. But so you didn't realise that you'd actually taken a photo of me in your shawl. But carry on.
Yeah, and in fact, that photo is included now on our website. So we're very happy that, Alan, that you and Goldie are featured on social media. But the lady that you see speaking is a fellow of the Joint Distribution Community, the JDC.
Yes.
An Ethiopian Jew, had an amazing story about her family's exodus from Ethiopia and becoming an Israeli citizen. And Minyan on the Palm, the beauty of it is that we just, we have so many visiting rabbis, so many Jewish organizations, including JDC, coming to us, bringing delegates, bringing photos, wanting Jews from all around the world to experience the UAE. But why, your question was, why are we in a hotel? So the Emirati officials reached out to me in about 2020, pre-COVID, and they said to me, Ross, it's time for you to move to the next level. We don't want you in a villa any longer. We want you publicly in a hotel. We want it to be smart. We want it to be formal. We also want it to be secure. And this is the next step for your community. And in fact, what we did during COVID is we used that period sort of from March 2020 to the sort of end of 2020 to move the community into the St. Regis. And it's been a very successful transition. And the hotel works fine for us. I mean, it is secure. It's very smart. It's very convenient for visitors. And we already have a very nice synagogue there. You showed a picture. We have a bimah, we have an aron. We have Sfarim, it's really by all intents and purposes, it's a functioning synagogue. But the future is obviously a built synagogue in Dubai. And it's important to mention to your listeners that in Abu Dhabi, there is, and in fact was consecrated this year, an official purpose-built synagogue, a most extraordinarily beautiful building that is part of something called the Abraham Family House, which is a campus that includes a mosque, a church, and a synagogue in a single structure on Sajjad Island, which is the sort of heart of the capital city. It's a little bit like in Germany, in Berlin, in your capital city, having the Tor, the Berlin Gate in the middle, the Reichstag on the left, and the Holocaust Memorial on the right. Germans are communicating something very powerful in their capital city about what matters to them. So what the Emiratis have done is something very similar. On Sajjad Island, in the middle of the capital, they have created a structure that includes a mosque, a synagogue, and a church. And they're saying, this is who we are. These are our symbols of state. And so there's an extraordinary built synagogue there. And now we have to build the same in Dubai. And I've already received confirmation that the Dubai government will issue land to the Jewish community so that we can build a synagogue. and that synagogue is going to be absolutely beautiful. And next time, Alan, you and Goldie visit, and hopefully other people on this call, in the future, we hope that they'll come to a purpose-built synagogue that will do us proud.
And is that planned to be somewhere in the city area near hotels?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So if you imagine the UAE, you have a coastline that leads, as you go south, it leads to Abu Dhabi. As you go north, it leads to Sharjah. As you face out into the ocean, you actually face Iran, interestingly, over the Arabian Gulf. But Jewish life is in the southern part of the city. So our synagogue minyan on the Palm is on Palm Jumeirah, which is the world's largest man-made island. And as you go south, there's a Chabad synagogue in an area of the city called the Marina. And the purpose-built synagogue is going to be just a bit south of that. If you look at a map of Dubai on Google, you'll see that, in fact, there are two palms. There's something called the Palm Jumeirah, and there's even a bigger palm called Palm Jebel Ali. And the purpose-built synagogue is just going to be inland of that second palm. By the way, the reason they built the palms was because the Dubai coastline is very short. And what they wanted to do is extend the coastline. So they built this tree-like structure so that many people, but especially expats, could have a sort of a beach-facing villa or apartment. And the second palm is about to be, it's built already and was built several years ago, but Nakhil, which is the developer, is going to start building villas and apartments on that soon. And that's a beautiful opportunity for anybody interested in investing in Dubai.
Okay, we'll do our little break. So if you're listening on J-Air, this is the Australian Jewish Association Zoom event, which we have every Wednesday night. Our guest tonight is Ross Kriel, the president of the Jewish Council of the Emirates, and we're talking about Jewish life in the UAE. I'm just going to hand over to David, and he'll tell us what's happening next week, and then we'll go to some questions. I think David's got a couple, and then we'll go to the audience. So over to you, David.
Okay, thank you so much, Alan. And as we do each week, anyone on the event who is not yet actively supporting AJA, make sure you go to the website at the end of the event, jewishassociation.org.au, where you can apply for membership if you're not yet a member. You can make a donation, which is very important. You can subscribe to the email list if you're not yet getting the AJA emails. Okay, next week we have a guest who has written a book called The Industry of Lies, and that's something that we can relate to a great deal in the description of the Israel-Arab conflict over many years. Journalist and author Ben Dror Yemeni will be joining us next week, and he's a superb commentator. I'll just add before we go to questions that our next television segment, which will be on some of the issues that Alan alluded to, The Voice and Israel, is going to be pre-recorded on Sky News because it will be televised on the Rita Panahi show, which is between 7 and 8 on Friday. But they've been very accommodating, and I'll be doing a pre-record a few hours beforehand, and then we'll hopefully have a video afterwards. So at the moment, AJA is getting way more media exposure than I think any Jewish organisation has ever had in this country, and that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah. David, do you have any questions for Ross before we go to the audience?
Yeah, I see we've got, I want to make sure we get to those that have put their hands up, but Ross, the Abraham Accords seem to be pushed by the Trump administration. Can you comment on what was the role of the Trump administration? And was it actually work in progress before the election of President Trump, or was it really a major initiative of that period? Ross, you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, the Abraham Accords was a massive achievement for the Trump administration, and something for, which we as Jews, I think, really owe them a debt of gratitude. It was obviously led very successfully by Jared Kushner. Is one of the very successful initiatives, but also Ambassador Friedman. The Abraham Accords itself was a huge diplomatic achievement. I think the person most responsible for it was Ambassador Yusuf Ataiba, who is the Emirati ambassador to the USA and probably the most senior diplomat in Washington, D.C. And in effect, what prompted it, we always knew there was going to be peace with Israel, but the timing was uncertain. But what happened was that in 2020, there was an issue around the annexation of the Jordan Valley, and it actually created quite complex issues for the Americans and for the Israelis, and the Emiratis were also quite concerned about it. And this was the issue that prompted them to come together. And a very small group of politicians and diplomats in those three countries managed to stitch together a deal that for the Emiratis included maintaining a two-state solution without annexation of the Jordan Valley. For the Israelis, it enabled them to make a key ally in the Middle East. And for the Trump administration, which was pro-Israel, it was a massive feather in their cap. And once they achieved that, all the way through the election, and even after, in fact, Trump had lost the election, the team of Jared Kushner especially, but other people like Lighthouse and Friedman, really worked. Lightstone, exactly. Yeah. All the way to the end to try to increase the number of Abraham Accords countries. So that then included Morocco, Bahrain, and then later Sudan as well. I do want to say, though, that I'm happy to report that the Abraham Accords essentially is a bipartisan issue in the USA. And if you're watching the newspapers, you'll see that Jake Sullivan, who's the national security advisor to President Trump, has had several meetings in Saudi Arabia and most recently in Jeddah with Mohammed bin Salman to explore the conditionality that Saudi Arabia has in terms of becoming an Abraham Accord nation as well. So it looks like the Biden administration, somewhat belatedly, has also powerfully embraced the Abraham Accords and are now in active discussions with Saudi Arabia around that. So it's a good thing for it not to be uniquely associated with the Trump administration, and must obviously be something that's part of bipartisan politics in the USA.
Okay.
Let's go to our questioners, Alan, and if there's time at the end, I'll come back.
Okay. All right. We've got Anne, Rachel, and Helen. So Anne, you're first. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Ross, if it's so obvious that it's working so well for the economy and it's working well for the people, and the people are looking outwards, and you've explained the visionary leadership, the other Arab countries must be extremely jealous. So why aren't they jumping on board?
Yeah, it's a good question, Anne. And, everybody's question is your one, which is who's going to be next and what is it going to take for that to be achieved? So probably Saudi Arabia could be the next Abraham Accords country. I think they are looking at the UAE and they have seen that it's worked. The economic benefits of the Abraham Accords, just to quantify, has now reached the $4 billion level in terms of annual trade with Israel. and it's kind of increasing exponentially. So that's still quite a small figure, but it's obviously come off a low base. And Saudi's got a very, very exciting policy under MBS of creating these new coastal cities, hubs of innovation, and they understand and they accept that peace with Israel would align with their strategy of massively building that economy and moving it away from its dependence on oil. So your question is, why is it not happening? So there's a few answers to that. The first is that outside of the Gulf, if you look, for example, at Syria and Jordan and Egypt and Lebanon, etc., some of which, of course, already have diplomatic contact with Israel. They've just got a different history altogether. They already had armed conflicts with Israel, and their relationship with Israel is very unlike that of the Gulf states. What's interesting about the Gulf states is they never had conflicts with Israel, and they have no animus, natural animus, certainly not in the UAE, towards Israel and towards Jews. Saudi, if you look at the example of Saudi, you've got a large population. It's got a street. Unfortunately, they were fed a diet of Wahhabi Islam for a very long time. So, that's a complexity. Qatar, as we saw during the World Cup, still harbors a kind of a natural animosity towards Israel, which they didn't conceal from them, when Israeli journalists visited Doha during the World Cup. You've got Hamas and sort of Muslim Brotherhood present still in Doha and Qatar, whereas in the UAE, they declared the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization back in 2016. So, all of these places are different. And, one of the main messages that I would, give to this group is that there's no such thing as the Arabic world. You've got multiple different politics, multiple different histories, multiple different ways of relating to Israel and Jews. So they've all got their own story. Oman, which Murray Maltzer knows much more about than I do, and he's on this call. Under their previous leadership, they actually invited Bibi Netanyahu to visit before the Abraham Accords under Sultan Qaboos. So there was a hope at that time that they could make peace with Israel. But then, unfortunately, the Sultan passed on, and his son doesn't have the same authority vis-a-vis the sort of religious leadership in Oman. So that's sort of set them back. So they've all got their own stories. And I think that what we as Jews and as influencers need to do is strongly support the Abraham Accords, make it a global movement, and ensure that as many Arabic countries join it as possible over time. And it will occur.
Good, thanks. Rachel, your turn. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks, Alan and Ross. Look, to some extent, I think you've probably touched on what my question's going to be, but I've been wondering right from the beginning of your talk, what sort of influence can the UAE bring to bear on the Palestinian issue and Hamas and Hezbollah?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I mean, the first point is that when the UAE entered into the Abraham Accords, one of the most important messages that they expressed was that the Palestinian agenda wasn't going to sort of be a single issue driving political issues, and especially the way that the UAE related to Israel. Their attitude was, we've given the Palestinian leadership decades to achieve peace with Israel and resolve the issue, and we funded them in doing so, and effectively they failed. And not only have they failed to achieve peace with Israel, but they've become a hotbed of Islamic fundamentalism. The West Bank and Gaza appear to have, they're functioning effectively as a failed state without clear sovereignty. They haven't managed security issues. So we're not going to let them any longer represent us on this. we are a sovereign nation and we will relate to Israel ourselves, and we will express our own self-interest or our own national interest in doing so. So that was a very, very important message, which was that the Middle East would no longer be driven in its agenda by the sort of Palestinian issue. So that's point number one. Point number two is that they do nevertheless strongly believe in a two-state solution. As I mentioned earlier, they wanted to avoid the annexation of the Jordan Valley by the Israelis because that would have made the two-state solution impossible. So they still are supportive, so to speak, of Palestinian self-determination, and that's their official policy. The third point to make is they have no tolerance whatsoever for violent extremism. And if you want to, you can Google somebody called Dr. Ali Al-Nuaimi, who's one of the most important thought leaders in the UAE. And he wrote an article in Newsweek, which you'll be able to find very easily, in which he said that Gaza was under occupation by Hamas, and that Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood are terrorist organizations. And he has not hesitated to strongly criticize their hostility and violent hostility towards Israel. So they absolutely will not condone in any way or endorse violent extremism, whether it's from Palestinians or any other Muslim group or any other group, period. So you get it. So you get a mix then, you get sort of quite a nuanced position in Israel. But basically what they've done, which I think is very, very helpful to summarize, is they've said that the Palestinian issue is not going to drive all their sort of agenda in Israel. There's other issues that are much more strategically important to them, including the relationship with Iran, economic integration of the region, etc. The second thing is they've made it very clear that they support a two-state solution. But the third thing they've said very strongly is that they won't endorse violent extremism.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, Helen, we'll take your question now. Please unmute.
You're really way into my question already, but I'll take it a little further. Since the change of administration in the United States from Trump to Biden, there has been, correct me if I'm wrong, complete support for the Palestinian issues of the United Nations from the United Arab Republic, and also you spoke about the bipartisan support for the present issue. But since Biden has come into power, there's been a complete change of policy on Iran, and this must have influenced the intricacy of what you're talking about now.
I think it's everybody, if you read anything, sort of most policy papers on the policy of the Biden administration vis-a-vis the Gulf, and especially vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia, it's very, very clear that they have, so to speak, misplayed that relationship very fundamentally. So you see, for example, Saudi Arabia and OPEC doing exactly what the US doesn't want it to do. You see Saudi Arabia reestablishing diplomatic ties with Iran. You take note of seemingly personal animosity between MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and President Biden. So all of that has been, so to speak, unsuccessful. And I think it's very clear that the US misplayed that relationship going back to the Khashoggi affair. I think, though, you see a reset happening more recently. In other words, Jake Sullivan meeting MBS, on 3 occasions very recently, including last week. The Saudis now very clearly articulating their conditionality for diplomatic recognition of Israel. So I think as you head towards an American election next year, I think there's been a reset in the Biden administration, which I think is sorely needed. And I think that's very positive for the region.
Yes. Ross, you touched on something before when you said that that because of a generational change, relations soured in one of the states. I mean, the obvious question is how can everybody be sure that the UAE is going to remain positive and warm and friendly? Could the same thing happen there?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, you know, the truth is, if you look at the US, the UAE, and Israel in the time that's lapsed since 2020, when the Abraham Accords were signed in September on the lawns of the White House, and I was there to witness it, by the way. There's been much more consistency of policy on the UAE side than either Israel or the US, and that's for obvious reasons. They're different political systems. The beauty of the UAE and the reason why it's flourishing is because their political system, which I'm describing loosely as a constitutional monarchy, enables them to establish long-range policy and to implement it. The UAE is a 50-year plan, and that's a plan around economic growth, regional integration, and political strategy as well. And the way that the system works is that there's really a lot of coherency around that plan. So the various royal families have appointed their crown princes, and they're appointed because they're aligned with that strategy. So if you said to me, take Israel, take the USA, and take the UAE, and make a prediction about what their policy is going to be in 20 or 30 years' time, and be a gambler and tell me which one you're most sure about. The country that I'm most sure about is the UAE, because they have a long-range plan. They have a political system that is really conducive towards stability and a long-term alignment around that plan. And I get a lot of confidence from that as a Jew. I mean, obviously, I'm putting a lot of effort into building the Jewish community, and I'm doing that because I'm optimistic about our future there, and I'm optimistic about the UAE. The second thing that I want to say more fundamentally is that not just in strategic plan, but also value system. I mentioned earlier on in the conversation that Sheikh Zayed and Sheikh Rashid are a little bit like, sort of Jefferson and Lincoln and Washington, D.C. They are founders of a sort of a covenantal nation with very, very clearly articulated values that everybody understands and is aware of, with quotations and monuments to support those value systems and state practice aligned with it. So the values are real. You know, people sometimes say to me, Ross, is this real? You know, and it really is. I mean, you know, I can give you, we can track an historical line that goes back decades of efforts that they've taken that have culminated in the Abraham Accords and the acceptance of the Jewish community. So I think the values are real. I think it's part of their DNA. It's inculcated into their youth. It's exemplified by their leaders. And that gives me comfort as well. And if I didn't have that comfort, I wouldn't build the Jewish community there. You know, we wouldn't want to do that, being uncertain about our future.
That's a very, very positive note to finish on. Ross, I just want to tell you that when Monty Saka, who's watching tonight, heard we were going to Dubai, he says, you absolutely have to get in touch with Ross Kriel. There's no question. You've just got to go to Ross's shul. So I want to thank Monty for that, because it was terrific advice. And Ross, I just want to thank you. You're doing an amazing job in the UAE, and I think you're actually adding in a tangible way to the political benefits of the Abraham Accords. So kol hakavod to you. And I will just mention to everybody that Dubai is actually a fabulous place to have a holiday destination. And if you can spend a Shabbat there, you'd really enjoy Minyan on the Palm. I'll just mention that we stayed in the hotel. The shul was in the hotel. The meals were in the hotel. Everything was in the hotel. It was just a wonderful Shabbat to spend with you. And I want to thank you for joining us tonight on our AJA Zoom event.
It's such a pleasure and a real honor. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, thank you, Ross Kriel. Just before we go, the L'chaim program with Morris Klein is on right now. It's on 3ZZZ FM 92.3, or that's at 3ZZZ.com.au. That's all we have for tonight. Don't forget, next week we have Bendror Yamini, and he's going to be talking about media hostility to Israel. And also, don't forget that you can keep up to date with what the AJA is talking about on our Facebook page, so please like it and share it widely. But for now, we wish you all a very good evening and look forward to seeing you next week as usual. So from me, it's good night to you all. Thanks again, Ross. Thanks, David. Good night.